Some of the best books I've ever read have had the ugliest covers, and I wouldn't not pick up an edition of a book if the only one that was on sale at that time was a movie tie-in cover. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And today I'm going to be talking about how I read a book, because I've been tagged by the wonderful Dani over at Spenelli Speaks, and I gather that this tag was created by Julie over at the Hungry Bookworm. I'll link both their channels below because they're both awesome. This looks like a really fun tag. It's only 5 questions, but I absolutely love talking about not only books but also reading. I've done a video on my reading habits, which I will link above and in the description box below, so you can have a bit of a deep dive into what I get up to when I'm between the covers. And I know that's a topic that so many of us must love, because I really enjoyed making that video, and it's one of, in fact, I think it's my most watched video on this channel. So I'm really excited to get into this tag and have a little bit more time to ponder the way that I go about reading. So let's crack on. The first question is, how do you go into reading a book? So I guess you get mood readers and you get planners, and I'm very much a planner. Because I do loads of annual reading challenges, I tend to plan out most of my reading at the start of a year. I do also add other reading in that. I'm part of the Shelterbox book club, which is run by the charity Shelterbox, and although I do get to vote on 3 books every month, really I don't have an awful lot of say in what I end up reading, so that's a bit of a random one. And then also because I do like to read a lot of NetGalleys, so these are either pre-releases or just new releases, I will tend to go about that in a bit more of a mood way. But ultimately I guess there is planning involved in that as well, because I tend to try and read in the order of their publication date, just so they can be as current as I can get them. I'm not doing too well on that at the moment, but that is always kind of my aim, at least. So in terms of how I go about picking the books that are on my TBR, I'm very much all about the premise first and the author second. I think a majority of the books that I've read have been by authors that I've never read before or since. There are a few authors that I have read multiple books by. Namely, I'm trying to think, so Margaret Atwood's probably the most prolific one. I've read quite a few David Mitchell's. I've read most of Donna Tartt, but she's only got 3 books, I think, so that's not really a huge achievement. But yeah, generally I will go by the book rather than the author. I would like to do more of a deep dive into specific authors. It's just never something that I did really ever thought about until I became part of the bookish community. So I would definitely like to read more Atwoods. I would like to read more David Mitchell, but I would definitely like to read more, and that's something that I'm hoping to look a bit deeper at, maybe bring up one of my lovely spreadsheets and just make sure that I'm aware of what authors that I've loved, what are the books that they've written, and try and get them onto my TBR as well. But in terms of when I'm looking at the premise of a book, what I think I'm drawn to first is books about human experience. So it could be things like identity or challenging times they've gone through in their lives, or maybe they're going through a big change in their life, like say someone's a refugee and they're having to leave their country, or someone is becoming a mother, or they are experiencing a long-term illness or something that is a big change to their life. Those are the stories that really speak to me. But then I do like another element on top of that, so something like uncovering family secrets or solving a mystery, or going on a personal journey, something like that, that turns it just from a life experience into an actual story, whether that's fiction or non-fiction. And they don't necessarily have to be situations or experiences that I myself have lived or experienced. I'm equally interested into lives and situations that I have never come into in my own life, would never come into in my own life. I think just for me it is really just that experience of being a human in the many shapes and forms that it takes. When we're talking about how I go into actually reading, I like to try and read 2 books a week, doesn't often happen. Sometimes one of those books will be quite big, or I just won't have made enough time for reading that week, or I'll have other things going on that it kind of gets in the way. But yeah, I do like to try and go for 1 to 2 books, I guess we'll say, a week. And so once I start a book, the first thing I do is I log it on my reading app. If you've been around my channel long enough, you'll have heard me talking about Bookly a lot, and I used to sing its praises, but it had colossally let me down a couple of months ago, where I was paying for the subscription, but it reverted to a free version and it lost all of my reading data, and they were completely unhelpful in getting it back. So I have turned my back on them completely, and I'm now using a different app. It's not got quite so much functionality on it, but it works perfectly for what I need. I now can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I absolutely will link it in the description box below, because I log the book into it. I make sure that the page numbers that it's got on its own data matches up with the edition that I've got. I set myself a goal for when I want to finish it, and then every time I sit down to read, I set the timer on and then log how many pages I've read in that session. And for me, part of it is a nerdy thing. I just quite like tracking my reading, but the other part of it is it helps me set goals, but it also kind of keeps me accountable as well. So, you know, days don't pass where I've only read like 10 pages a day or something. I've got that kind of fire lit that, I want to finish this by this date. And it keeps me going with that. And then after I've done that, I just read. I consciously make that time to read. I always read for an hour in bed at night, but I always try and make an hour in the evening, whether it's whilst I'm sitting, my 3-year-old still needs me to be in the room while he falls asleep, so when I'm sitting with him, or I will watch a bit of telly, but I will turn the telly off so I have that time to read. Maybe I'll read on my lunch break if I'm not so busy at work, things like that. I will make that time to read every single day. I'm not really the sort of reader that takes notes. I don't annotate books. I don't write in the margins or anything like that. I don't even really highlight quotes very often, not even on my Kindle, which makes it super easy. Very, very rarely will I do that. I just like the experience of reading, just, you know, enjoying the story, getting through the book. And that, for me, that's all I need to take from the reading experience. I don't think that makes me a better reader or a worse reader than anyone that does have all those lovely little coloured tabs sticking out of their books. Sometimes I do kind of wish I was that sort of person, but I think for me it would slow my reading down too much, and I don't have an awful lot of time to devote to reading. So what time I have is I want it to be time that's spent turning the pages. Question number 2 is, do you take a book at face value? I don't really know what this question means. If we're talking about covers, then yeah, sometimes I will. I've said many, many times before, as I think we all are, like anyone who says they're not is lying. I'm a sucker for a nice cover. Like it will grab my attention. It will get me as far as reading the blurb on the back of the book or looking it up on Goodreads or whatever. So it definitely is the hook that gets me into something. Would I buy a book purely based on its cover? No. There are some gorgeous covers out there that I've seen, but I know that, you know, they're on fantasy books which don't really appeal to me, or other books that I don't read an awful lot of, like YA and things. So it's not really down to the cover. And because I buy a lot of my books secondhand, I can't really be choosy about the covers either. Some of the best books I've ever read have had the ugliest covers, and I wouldn't not pick up an edition of a book if the only one that was on sale at that time was a movie tie-in cover. And I also know that particularly kind of smaller presses or independent publishers or academic publishing houses, they don't always have the kind of the big art team or the money to spend on these incredibly eye-catching covers. So I would still pick those books up though if the actual premise of the book spoke to me. But if we're talking about things like hype as well, I'm not a big fan of hype. If anything, hype will sometimes turn me off of a book. What I always ask myself, especially actually if a book is being hyped, is you know, is this a book that I would read? I don't really care that a lot of other people have read it. I don't really care that it's popular enough to be turned into a film or anything like that. That is not what would get me into a book. And often I'm mindful of the fact that hype just means popular. And popular does not always mean good. Because if we like put it in a different perspective, if we look at music, for example, think of all the overhyped acts that went on to have, I mean, even a moderately successful career for a short amount of time. I think of things like the Cheeky Girls and Jedward. Hype does not always mean good. So I guess basically, I don't take a book at face value. I take a book on its value to me. Question number 3 is, do you read a book as the author intended, or do you go into it deeper and peel it back? I think sometimes what the author intended is for you to go deeper. But honestly, I probably do just, I guess I read it as I intended. You know, I'm not a scholar. I didn't study literature at university. I mean, I wish I had. English was literally the only thing I was good at school. I got an A in my higher for that without even trying. Whereas the subjects that I had studied for, I got B's and C's for. I would have loved to have studied literature at university, but unfortunately there was a bit of a barrier to entry for me. They wanted something like all 5 A's, and I just didn't have that, so I wasn't able to do that. And it hasn't stopped me reading, obviously, but I guess it means that I don't have a certain toolkit that you might have if you have looked at things in an academic way. So there is probably that part of me that's lacking in my own skill set to enable me to dive deeper into a book. But honestly, I read to be entertained, and any deeper thinking that I do about a book is probably quite internal in a lot of ways, and I can reflect on that and apply things to my own life, or if it's something that I haven't got my own experiences of, I will maybe reflect on what I've learned from that book. And sometimes I will probably see connections between other things that I've read or situations that might be in the news and things like that. So I maybe do pick up on themes and how a book relates to the wider world, but I don't do it on any deep level. And you know, I think that kind of reflection is probably what a lot of authors intend anyway. So I think I probably do read a lot of books as the author intended. And I don't know, I think sometimes it's not always appropriate to go deeper into a book, because then you run the risk of assigning opinions or a world view on the author that perhaps they don't actually have, and that is where cancel culture just goes apeshit. So, you know, I'm quite content at the level of analysis and scrutiny that I give books, even if for some of them that level is a 0. Some books make you think and some don't, and that's just as varied as there are books out there. And question 4 is quite a long one. So it's, as a booktuber, reader or reviewer, do you read a book differently knowing you're going to review it? Do you venture into other genres for a review? So I'll answer those two kind of parts of it separately. So do I read a book differently knowing I'm going in to review it? That's a really hard question to answer, because although I've only been on BookTube since March, I have been a book reviewer for a very long time. I think I got my Goodreads account in 2010, and I reviewed books even before that. I used to have a live journal. Shout out to all my retro LJers. And every time I read a book, I would review it in my live journal, just as part of me kind of chronicling my own life. It's something I've always loved to do, is just after I finished a book, is just gather my thoughts about it and share them, because I would hope that someone would read those and decide to pick up that book, or in the very rare cases where I've read a book that I've absolutely hated, will know not to pick that book up. I just love it. It's part of the joy of reading for me. So do I read books differently knowing I'm going to review them? No, probably not. My thoughts, my reviews are all, they're honest for a start. I will never read like a great piece of literature or a book that everyone else has loved and say that I loved it when I hated it. Like, it's just not me. I think it's perfectly okay to not like a book. But alternatively, I could sometimes struggle to gush about a book. I don't know what that's about. Like, if I love a book, I'll tell you I've loved it, but I really do. I love booktubers that can get really almost like fangirl boy-ish about a book, because that's just, I guess it's just not part of my personality. It's not whether I loved the book more than they did or they loved the book more than I did. It's just the way I express myself. But yeah, my reviews are always, I like to give a little synopsis of what the book is about, just in case someone's come to that review cold, and then just talk about the things that I loved and possibly the things that didn't gel with me. But I think even if I wasn't writing a review, they would be the sorts of thoughts I'd have on finishing a book. I think it's just part of my hobby is to review them. The second part, what was the second part of that question? Do you venture into other genres for a review? No, probably not. Sorry. As I've said earlier in this video, and many times, people are probably sick of me saying it, but I'm not a fantasy reader. So I wouldn't read a fantasy book just so I could review it, whatever the kind of motivation behind that was, whether it was to slate it because I don't like fantasy, or whether it was to, I don't know, I've never been paid for a review, but if it was to get paid for a review, would I read a book and review it even if I wasn't interested in it? No. That's just not fun for me, and I wouldn't, well, yeah, there's like a moral grey area there as well. But no, I wouldn't. Has my love of reviewing books maybe encouraged me to look up different genres that I hadn't read before? Probably, because as part of that love of reviewing books, I love hearing other people review books, which is why I'm on Booktube and watch loads of Booktubers, and I'm on Goodreads and read what people have to say about books. So that's all part of that reviewing hobby, and it has encouraged me to pick up books and genres that I wouldn't have before. So I guess there's a kind of a yes no in that, but I wouldn't pick up a genre I know I wouldn't enjoy, I think, is the bottom line with that. I don't know if any of those thoughts were cohesive, but that is how I read. But no, I've really enjoyed answering those questions. Actually, it's made me consider things about my reading that, you know, are there, but I maybe hadn't really thought about before. So thank you to Julie for creating this tag, and Dani for tagging me in it. I've really enjoyed answering those questions. And obviously, like I said at the start, I'll link both of their channels below so you can check them out. Am I supposed to tag people? I'm never very good at doing this, and I know a few people now have done this tag. So I'm going to go for Kim at Bookmarks and Breadsticks, and Ange from Ange with an E, and one more. Charlie Heathcote. You are all tagged, but really, anyone is tagged. You know, this is not an elite system. If you see this tag, if you like this tag, if you want to answer for yourself, do it, and please let me know that you have so I can see your answers. But for now, I'm going to wrap up. I've got to go and cook dinner, and I've got parents' night tonight very soon. So yeah, I'll just leave you there for now. But if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. I'd love to have you chat books with me. How do you read a book? I'd love to know, so drop me a comment below. And until next time, bye.